Thank you, everybody, for being here. Topic of today's conversation, we're going to talk about um, how to add $10 million in enterprise value to your practice in the next 5-year period without burning out. And the focus of today is going to be mostly around doing this organically. There's a lot of talk about M&A and the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Which is great. There's always an exit at the end. And so as you guys think about your practices, absolutely that 5-year trajectory towards an additional 10 million in enterprise value. That's what I would love for you to get out of the presentation today is a couple of key strategies to actually add that kind of liquidity to your exit. But I'm just going to answer a question that came in from somebody as we get started. And if you guys have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. They could be about this topic. They could be about anything else in the world of M&A, valuations, talent, technology, operations, workflow, kind of anything in the macro of the CPA firm space is what our expertise is here at White Tiger. So thank you for being here, and we're going to get started in just a minute. But I'm going to answer this question from one of our participants here. I'm expanding my practice partially through firm acquisition. In your eyes, what are some of the most important things to get right or to focus on when acquiring other firms? So really great question. As a buyer, there are CPAs, private equity firms, wealth management firms, law firms, all buy tax and accounting and A&A practices for different reasons. There's a few universal things that are great if you can kind of find firms that have those things. And they're great because they are easier to fulfill upon when it comes to your taking over the client service model. And so I'll answer your question just with kind of a broad brush. Recurring revenue is really great. Tech enabled is really great. The more we want as buyers, so a buyer of your practice eventually, and therefore as you buy other practices and integrate them into your firm, lean tech enablement is great. Doesn't need to be every bell and whistle and tax GPT and agentic AI and all those crazy things, but strong project management system is always fantastic with cloud enabled tax software clients. If it's accounting that you do, more QBO than QBD. I mean, it's the usual suspects, right? You really want to trust your intuition is just good blanket advice. If it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it smells like a duck, it's probably a duck. Doesn't mean that all ducks are bad. It just means that you have to have a taste for eating duck. I have buyers in my network that just love to buy $500 1040 practices. And that's all they do. They buy the volume tax practices that have people, actually, in some cases, they're $200 1040 practices that have clients coming into the office and lining up around the corner, like I imagine it was in the good old days. And there are, plenty of firms out there that have thousands and thousands of clients that just do simple 1040s. And if that's what you like, there's something to be said for that. So maybe even step back a little bit and think about what some of the things that you can do, ideas that you have for how to do things differently, perhaps, is something that could help you stand out and maybe even target something that would not be as attractive to most of the streamlined buyers. That's another strategy that you might consider. So hopefully that was helpful. It was a little circuitous, perhaps, but trust your instincts. Probably the best advice I could give you without knowing a little bit more about what you're looking to accomplish. Well, anyway, guys, thanks so much for being here. If you have questions throughout the conversation today, please drop them in the chat. Anything at all about M&A, executive recruitment, lower level recruitment, offshoring, tech enablement, operations, workflow management, anything, functional expansion into wealth management or insurance or other ancillary services, if you do tax and you're thinking about bookkeeping, anything at all in the realm of public accounting. And M&A is specifically the topic of today's conversation. Even more specifically, how to add $10 million in liquidity to your exit in 5 years without burning out. That's a mouthful, and it's also a tough thing to consider because $10 million is a lot of money. And most accounting firm owners that I know, whether you're running a CPA practice or you're running a bookkeeping practice or you're running a tax advisory or a tax prep practice, or anything in between or beyond in the CPA space, most owners are already inundated with work. And so it's kind of a crazy concept to think that you could add $10 million in enterprise value without burning out in 5 years. But it is entirely possible. And what I'm going to walk you through over the next 20 minutes or so is proof of that based off of real deals that my firm has done. And the difference between two of those deals being just about $10 million in liquidity and some surmountable steps to go through in order to get from the deal that did $10 million less to the deal that did $10 million more. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some other acquisitions kind of on either side of those two transactions. So I'd like to paint a picture for you of the kind of deals that my firm is seeing in the market. There's a lot of difference between some of the deals that we've seen. The largest deal that we've done as a firm to date, White Tiger Connections, was about a $20 million enterprise valuation. And we're going to talk about that deal today. And the smallest deal that we've done was, goodness, $50,000, $40,000 book of business. That's not one of the ones we're going to talk about today, but we are going to talk about a small one, $700,000 tax practice. And we're even going to go bigger than the 20 million to an opportunity that was a nine-figure enterprise value. And I think that puts a really great kind of stake in the ground about what's possible, depending on the degree of ambition that you have. Ultimately, as you think about your exit strategy, wherever you are right now, whether you run, whether you don't yet run an accounting firm, or if you're running a $500,000 accounting firm, or if you're running a $5 million accounting firm, or if you're running an $8 million accounting firm, there are certain frontiers that you can achieve. And the question that I get asked all the time is kind of what's the right target for me to have? I want to continue working for 3 more years or 5 more years or 7 more years. And then there are factors that, might play into how much longer you work, if you have, kids who are coming into the business, or if you're nervous that technology is going to, totally disrupt the world. I actually think it's going to help accountants. I don't think it's going to hurt you guys. And that's true whether you do tax work or bookkeeping or really anything. I think that as an owner, tech will only make your lives better because it is and will remain a tool. I really believe that. So, but regardless, however you think about the reasons why you might leave, or the reasons why you might stay and kind of push to the next revenue frontier, the next EBITDA frontier, expand into different service categories. Usually when I talk to an owner, it always has some kind of grounding in your life, because this is your life. We hopefully we work to live and not the other way around. And that's something that a lot of accountants, our profession has a reputation for people dying at their desk. And I'm sure that no one who's participating in this webinar today wants to do that, or you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't want to talk about how to add $10 million in enterprise value to your firm in the next 5 years. So hopefully this is valuable to you. It kind of helps frame some of the thinking around what your goals should look like, and what they should look like based on your life, not based on my or anyone else's expectations or superimposition. But it's intended to be kind of a broad brush overview of what the market is doing, and you can make some intuitive judgments about how to take this information and apply it to your firm, to your runway, and to your goals and objectives. So without any further ado, I'm going to share my screen here and we're going to get started. All right. So and if you're listening to this, don't feel the need to pay, close attention to the slideshows. If you're, multitasking, that's perfectly fine. The slides hopefully will just help because there's a lot of information here. So I find that when I stare at something, it helps to kind of set stuff in. So the 5-year exit, how to add $10 million without burning out. And this specifically within the next 5 years. That's the topic. So what we're going to do to get started is we're going to go into 5 deals. And this is the first deal. This is a deal that we did last year. And so I'm just going to run through some of the specs with you. So this was a $700,000 tax practice, also bookkeeping, but mostly tax practice in Texas, 1,000 1040s and about 100 businesses. This company had 30 bookkeeping clients at an average rate of about $200 a month for each of the bookkeeping clients, and about a $300 average 1040 cost across those 1,000 1040s that the firm did. So not a super attractive practice by industry standards. 6 staff, every return crossed the owner's desk. That's a really important point. So the owner was one of those 6 staff, but he did not have anyone on his team who was capable or who he trusted, is probably a better way of putting it, to do final review and signing of any of the 1,000 1040s that crossed his desk. And so obviously there's a lot of bottlenecking there. And from a compensation perspective, the owner took just under $200,000 out of the bids. So all in expenses were a little over 500. And I think it was about $135,000 draw, something like that. And then a $50,000 to $60,000 distribution that he would take on average year over year. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of the firm. And there's also a pretty healthy amount of foot traffic. That's important to note. Generally speaking, the less foot traffic in today's environment, the better. That's kind of a general rule of thumb, not always true, but generally speaking, especially when we're talking about kind of a volume business like this, that's certainly more true than not. And so the practice sold for 0.85 times gross revenue. He got 20% down with a 4-year earnout based on client retention, an $80,000 salary to work for 40 hours a week during busy season and 25 hours a week during off season for 2 years, and then part-time to be determined based on where the business was and what the buyer's needs were in, pertaining to the seller's business after the 24-month mark. So this gives you kind of an initial stake in the ground for one of the smaller, more volume rich, lower price, lower valued practices that we've done within the last year. So that's number 1. We're going to go on to number 2, and they're going to get a little bit better in ascending order as we go through these deals. I think you guys will pick up what I'm putting down pretty quickly. All right, so this practice was a $2 million CPA firm in Pennsylvania, a single owner, minimal foot traffic in his practice. He did tax, accounting, and certified financials, so compilations and reviews, but no audits. And those were for some of the higher net worth clients and their closely held businesses. And a lot of his clients, he did tax advisory and compliance. He did the bookkeeping and maybe some light kind of CFO work, and then the certified financials for those businesses. So he was a full kind of spectrum CPA. About 500 clients, high net worth individuals, closely held businesses, some lower 1040s, $600-700, but not too many. And those were largely legacy clients and people who he knew and liked, not kind of his core ideal client profile. 10 staff, including 3 CPAs. And his staff was a little bit younger, which was, generally it's another thing. I know we're not supposed to be age discriminatory, but if you're a buyer evaluating a practice and the average age, and I have seen this before, of a 10-person staff is in their late 50s or early 60s, you're probably going to raise some eyebrows about how to service $2 million in business as opposed to if the average age is mid 40s, which today is considered young. And so that's what he had. So that was an attractive factor. The owner drew 250,000 out of the business. And I don't know if you guys can hear it, but outside my office, they are having like a party in town tonight. So if you hear like disco music bumping in the background, it's not me. It's just interesting night to have a party in town while I'm doing this presentation. Anyway, all right. So owner drew 250,000 out of the practice in a draw, and his total earnings was 650,000. So an average distribution of about 400 grand. So, essentially a 33% margin to his practice, more or less, which is strong in terms of total take home. And so he got a 1.35 times gross revenue multiple. That was SBA finance. So the 7A process, he got 90% of that down, which is super, attractive for a seller who, the more cash down, the better. Contrast that from this last practice in Texas, where the owner only got 20% down of 0.85 times 700. Here he's getting, the valuation at 1.35 is $2.7 million, and he got 90% of that paid to him up front. So right off the bat, that's a tremendous upgrade based on the amount of cash and the multiple. And then he also took a $100,000 salary working for 2 years in a part-time capacity. So this second practice is obviously materially better than the first, but not as good as the third. And let's go on. So this third practice was a 5 million and change top line revenue practice in Illinois. Single owner operated again. So these are all single owner operated. I don't mean to discriminate. They'll start to have multiple partners in the fourth and fifth deal. This is a tax only firm. So this owner did advisory, compliance, resolution work, and entity formation. So he was a CPA and a JD. So the one maybe addendum I'll say on the tax only side was he also did kind of paralegal services for his clients, helping construct straw men. And but he had a separate law firm. So anything that kind of squarely fell into legal services, he did through the law firm, which he did not sell. And inside of his CPA practice, the tax firm, he would do some of those kind of subordinate entity formation and maybe paralegal things that implicated the larger tax process that he was really executing. And so he had about 20 staff, including 8 CPAs on his staff. And he received an $11 million, it's actually $11.5 million purchase price. I think I have 11 here. It's 11.5 million was his purchase price, with 6 million in cash up front, 3 million promissory. So promissory is essentially one of the levers that private equity firms use to say, we're not going to pay you this cash up front, but we're not going to give you, an earnout on, some portion of the business either. And so promissory note is essentially a guaranteed payment provided that the company doesn't go bust. And there's, various level of lien, priority, secondary, tertiary. I don't know how favorable the lien was, but I would imagine it was pretty favorable because this guy's a JD, so he knew his way around a deal structure. And so it was a guaranteed $3 million promissory note. And those promissory notes typically will include interest. So that's the way that most of these private equity firms will kind of get around the cash figure, but still be able to say, hey, we're going to give you 9 million of this $11.5 million purchase price as guaranteed payment to you. We're not going to go insolvent. We want to do more deals. We're going to run our other companies responsibly, just like we're running yours. And then there's interest on that $3 million promissory note. So that's their way of kind of awarding the sellers who will take on that kind of that note, that guaranteed payment. And then a $2.5 million earnout over 4-year period. So the earnout is another way of saying basically seller financed, or it's based on client retention, revenue retention. at that $5 million top line figure. And then he took a $300,000 salary for the 4-year period. So has an employment contract. And he was in his 60s, but a pretty youthful guy. I think they also had a key man life insurance policy, which is typical once you start to get into, heavy amount of cash up front deal kind of a thing. So we're going to go into more detail about these two deals, this second deal and this third deal here. But if you just look at the difference quickly before we move on, you've got a $2.7 million purchase price for this second deal, which is 2 million in revenue, 650K in total bottom line, and that 1.35 gross revenue valuation. And then you look at this deal at $5 million in top line, 5 and change, $2 million in bottom line. And again, this is, I should say, $11.5 million purchase price. And you're at 8.8 million in difference between this 11.5 figure and this 2.7 figure. So this right here, accounting for regular multiple increases, which I believe with all my heart and soul, from what I am seeing, that multiples are going to continue to rise over the next 3 to 5 years in this space because of the talent crisis, because of how critical tax and accounting and advisory services are for the sustenance of the economy. There's a lot of trends that point toward, including what's happened in the last 5 years and some other, consumer index type things. A lot of signs are pointing analysts in the space to project that multiples will rise. So, $8.7 million delta between firm number 3 here and firm number 2, with conservative rising in multiples, you're at your $10 million difference. And so the question becomes, which we're going to get into in a couple of minutes here, can you take a firm from $2 million in top line and 650K in bottom and turn it into a $5 million firm with $2 million in bottom line in 5 years? The answer to that question for everyone listening to this call is unequivocally yes. It can be done. And so we're going to go into some of the variables that make that plausible and make that plausible regardless of, again, what service line in the public accounting ecosystem or what niche you focus on. But before we get into that, let's go down to this fourth firm, and then we have one more, and then we'll go back and focus on the second and third practices. So the fourth practice is a major metro specialized firm. Let me get my paper notes here. So this is a $10 million firm in a major metro, industry specialized niche. So all 10 million of their revenue was in that same niche. I won't tell you what niche because there's not enough firms in that niche that you'd be able to figure out exactly who they are if you really wanted to, and have to maintain confidentiality. But it's a major niche in a major metro. 5 partners, 4 of whom are or were retiring within the next 4 years. So I'll say that again, 5 partners, 4 of whom were retiring in the next 4 years. So with the niche specialization and 4 of 5 partners retiring in 4 years, have to understand, the buyer had whoever the buyer was going to be had a major lift in being willing to take on the recruiting responsibility of replacing those 4 key members, including the managing partner and the number 2 were included in the 80% of partners who were retiring. But they had a pretty strong bench of talent as well. Anyway, so about 10 million in top line, just about 50% in gross profit, and 2 million in net profit. So figure that the partners, basically considered their fair market compensation to be 600,000 a piece across the 5 partners, gets you that, give or take per partner, gets you that $3 million delta between the gross profit and the net profit. And the purchase price here was $20 million. So this is the largest deal, excuse me, the largest deal that we have done as a firm to date in the CPA profession. Purchase price was $20 million. And so This company got 50% cash down, just about exactly close to exactly $10 million cash at closing. 25% of their equity was rolled into this roll up. They were not the only firm that was acquired. The buyer had done many other acquisitions before, including, by the way, in this space, which was the only reason in this niche, which was the only reason why they were comfortable doing so, taking on such a substantial recruiting burden, senior recruiting burden in that niche practice in this, difficult talent market environment that we're in, very competitive, as you all know, and then a 25% earnout over 4 years. So again, a 25% roll. So the roll is something that you see in a lot of these roll-up strategies, private equity firms, where they call it like the second bite of the apple. So one way when you guys are ready to exit, whether that's now or in the distant future, this strategy is pretty typical, and I imagine will remain so. There's some amount of cash up front that's paid to you. They want to incentivize you to stay, so they're going to give you, a reduced salary, some kind of compensation, maybe bonus potential, depending on what kind of the strategy is from an integration perspective. Sometimes it includes cross-selling to an ancillary service like wealth management. Or legal, regardless. And then there's this component of the enterprise value, which is rolled. That's a popular strategy that private equity are doing. And then when the private equity, the roll up, whether it's a CPA or a private group, when they themselves exit, then your equity, you get that second bite at the apple. That's the purpose of that phrase. And so the idea there being that, the 25% equity in the context of this $20 million valuation would be worth $5 million, obviously, today, but that equity rolled into this larger enterprise would be worth 10 or 15 or $18 million when the private equity firm achieved their objective. Because as you're intuiting here, the multiple on the net profit, which is the most important variable to get to this $20 million purchase price, is 10. Right? So you're talking 10 times adjusted EBITDA here. Adjusted after partner compensation is what the multiple on this practice is. Where if we go back up here to this one, you've got $2 million on a 5 and change top line revenue. You've got to adjust for partner compensation. So 300,000 subtracted from 2 million, you're at about $1.7 million. And if you do 11.5 divided by $1.7 million, that adjusted EBITDA figure, we get something like 8, give or take. So, we're at a multiple of 8 on adjusted EBITDA here. Even though the adjusted EBITDA is essentially the same figure, because this is just a more substantial firm, it's got the niche specialty, it's obviously got a much more substantial bench of talent to produce 10 million in revenue. I think this had 43 staff as opposed to 20 over here, a lot of CPAs. So, you start to see that arbitrage. Usually, the best way to assure yourselves that you will get that arbitrage, that higher multiple on adjusted EBITDA, is to increase the net profit, right? And this net profit and this net profit are the same. But what is important to note is that ultimately, adjusted EBITDA, net profit is not the only thing that buyers look at. Buyers will very much also look at kind of the growth possibility that lies dormant inside of a business when they're able to apply their strategy to it. And as I said, this buyer already had nexus in this industry. This firm did have a strong bench of talent, a lot of CPAs on staff. But even so, 8 and change on adjusted EBITDA, 10 on adjusted EBITDA, these are pretty attractive figures. So without further ado, let's move on to the fifth and final deal before we go back and kind of break down some of those variable components of adding the 10 million in enterprise value. So this fifth deal was not a deal that I represented on the sell side. It was actually, I was representing the buyer. And so this was an investment banking run process that we failed on. We did not win this deal. But it taught me a great deal being a part of this, and I want to highlight it because I think that it really kind of shows the proverbial ceiling of what's possible in this space, and I really believe it actually goes even beyond this. So, but I don't want to go too much into that today. Anyway, so this is a $33 million top line, accounting, advisory, and tax practice. They also did business management, so bill pay for high net worth clients. $11 million in net profit. So that's after owner partner compensation. And this was not a CPA firm. So it's really like kind of the closest thing I could call it would be like a fractional CFO firm, even though they did a lot more than that. But the bulk of their revenue was advisory services. They had transaction advisory practice, accounting advisory or CFO practice, several niche specializations within their advisory practice. And then they did these other things. They did tax advisory, tax compliance. They did, again, the business management type stuff. No audit and assurance services, not a CPA firm. And so 11 million after anyone who had equity was paid a salary, right? So that $11 million was the true bottom line figure. Now, we lost on our IOI, which is an indication of interest. If you're not familiar with how an investment banking process, well, let me start with this in case you don't know what an investment bank is, because some people do not. An investment bank is essentially like, what we are. We're a business broker. We're a registered business broker, but a non-FINRA licensed business broker. And so the way that mergers and acquisitions work is that you do not have to be securities licensed with FINRA. I don't know what series licensing that is, but it's a SEC license. You don't have to be SEC licensed in order to buy and sell, represent buyers and sellers in mergers and acquisitions, as long as the business does less than 250 million in top line and less than 25 million in bottom line. You can do mergers and acquisitions. And of course, that's from a volume standpoint, the vast majority of the market. So business brokers, if you hear that expression, will do business below that. Investment banking firms are able to do businesses at any size because they are securities licensed. They are broker dealers in a business brokerage capacity, as well as being able to do things like wealth management and beyond. You also have RIAs, which are independent wealth management firms, not what we're talking about here, but broker dealers, in this case, that do business brokerage, can manage wealth, but they are regulated by FINRA up the wazoo, which is why a lot of wealth management firms and business brokers like me will opt to be independent and just a pure play business brokerage or an RIA capacity. Anyway, back to this. So an investment bank represents, usually sellers, and their more substantial deal sizes will typically go to the investment bank. Just like if you're running $100 million manufacturing firm, you probably aren't working with, boutique Joe Blow CPA firm who does a few million in revenue. You're probably calling KPMG or RSM or one of the big boys in order to do your work. Similarly, the investment bankers are the guys who get these big juicy deals. So anyway. So these guys were representing this firm. So 33 million top, 11 million bottom. Now we submitted how a process works with investment bankers is they do what's called an auction. And an auction essentially is you do a call for IOIs. An IOI is an indication of interest. And, all these investment bankers know tons and tons of private equity firms. And so when they get a deal like this, they run this auction process and they get bids. And the IOI is essentially a bid, a lot like an LOI, but the IOIs, in this case, they do what's called the call, which is they get, a bunch of them all at the same time. This particular firm got like 50 plus bids, which is a lot, right? And so we submitted our bid was, it's typical to do bids in a range at between a 14.5 and a 15.5 times net profit valuation. So we were thinking that this company was going to sell for like $150 million. And we were not even awarded a meeting with the seller. So we were not one of the top 5 people. And you don't get a second chance. This is a very exclusive process. And they do what's called a post-mortem, which I think is a funny name because they want to, the banker wants to retain a relationship with the private equity firm. And in our postmortem, this private equity firm I was representing, we were told that we were not less than 2 turns short. That's the phrasing that they use. So the reality is that this company quite likely sold around $175 million valuation. And you see these figures. And so what does that mean? What it means is that there is an absolutely exorbitant amount of demand for the business that you all are in, if you are watching this webinar. And depending on what it is that you want to do, it is possible to achieve this. This is not we're not talking 100 million in top line and a $30 million revenue here. This is not orders and orders and orders of magnitude beyond where you are today if you're a one or a two or a $5 million firm. Between organic growth and between M&A, you can do this kind of growth if you really want to. Now, this is not for everybody. You might want to have a lifestyle business, but I actually believe that these multiples, again, are going to continue to rise. And the reason for that, which I won't go too much into detail today, I'm already doing more talking than I intended to. The reason why I believe they're going to continue to rise is that I don't think there is a better environment to build a technology platform than inside of a professional services firm that is finance focused. Whether we're talking about finance as, tax, accounting, wealth management, payroll, whatever it is, especially advisory services, but even compliance, because compliance really is where all the data lives. And so if you want to serve clients better, if you think for a second about what the 2030s is going to look like, we're already pretty far along with AI and it's not even 2026 yet. The kind of stuff that's going to be possible over the next handful of years is really mind-boggling. And the ecosystem to build and test and deploy these next generation products, I believe, largely exist within environments where trust has already been established, and that is the advisory services realm. And the other important piece is data, as I mentioned. So, technology companies, the multiples that we see for like the venture capital firms that turn into unicorn billion-dollar companies and then, have to decide between an acquisition or an IPO as their liquidity event, we're seeing multiples there between 20 and 25 times the bottom line. And that is what I think the professional services market has in its future, because in a couple of years, everything is going to be a technology company. And so that's just a little bit of philosophy for us. It's not where we are today, but we're talking about 5 years and what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So it is an important point. So coming out of the clouds, we're going to come back down to earth a little bit and meet you where you're at with wherever your firm is. You're probably not running a $30 million business if you're hanging out with me today. But whether you're at 1 million or 5 million, here are some of the variables that matter, right? Just at a high level. The things that you want to build, this is what to answer your question, the gentleman who asked at the beginning of the webinar, as well as what you want to look for in the practices that you purchase. Young, staff-rich, technically competent firm, tech-enabled, lean, and powerful software stack, like I said earlier, great clients or strong net profits. So you can do 2,000 1040s, and those 1040s can be $500 a piece, and you can run that $1 million practice at a 50% margin. That is completely plausible, right? So you don't need a tremendously great client practice. You could have a profitable practice and do quite well for yourself. But it's best if you have both. It's best if you have strong clients. You don't want all of your client concentration, your revenue concentration, to be in one or two or three clients. You want to have diversity. A lot of buyers start to get nervous if you have any one client that accounts for more than 10% of your revenue. So if you can have clients, if you have 100 clients and they each pay you $10,000, that's tremendous. That's the kind of thing that, you've got your risk is spread, and you've got these great client relationships where there's probably that dormant value in those client relationships, and certainly the ability to continue to service them that these buyers are looking for, right? Recurring revenue is great. The less project revenue, the better. The more recurring revenue, the better. Although if project revenue comes back every year, you can make a case for project revenue like a tax return being recurring revenue, but just understand that it's not looked at as favorably as if you can productize how to turn that project into a program, into a service, into something that's ongoing. And that really can be done. A lot of that boils down to client communication, client optics, and strategy. So think about that. Think about it hard because it is possible to do that. Remote infrastructure is really important. As I said, the more digital, the better. Um, you can build a great company in a fully remote capacity. And this is something that a lot of accounting firms struggle with. There's that, the affinity for being able to be in the office together, a strong sense of culture that's physical. Um, one of the reasons why, there's two key reasons why it's a good thing to invest in a company that can have remote staff. And I'm not just talking about remote staff where, you've worked with somebody for 10 years and they move to a different state and you say, oh, well, this person can be remote because of course they're already integrated. I would expect that's kind of a minimum expectation that kind of person can be remote. But, remote means that you can onboard someone remotely and that you've got an environment, a technology stack, a set of expectations of SOPs, an ecosystem, a sandbox that they can operate within with quality controls and accountability systems and training and development where you're actually empowering the hire to be successful. And that's true whether it's an intern or whether it's a director who's working for you. On a path to partnership. And there are countless firms. I spoke with one today, a $3.5 million fractional CFO firm that specializes in serving venture capital backed companies. It's a great firm, and they've been fully remote since COVID. 5 years they've been fully remote, and I guess before COVID. And he said, I see you talking, Jeff, about this remote stuff. I guess we're a little ahead of the curve because we've been doing that since before it was cool. He's right. You are ahead of the curve, and it's something that's very attractive to buyers. It's also necessary if you want to grow because the talent just isn't there. It's not there geographically. And it is there if you take the guardrails off of geography as the holdback factor. So, if you suspend disbelief for long enough to say, well, gee, all of a sudden the talent crisis isn't so bad. It's actually, there are a lot of people who are looking when you take the entire country as a candidate pool. The reason why I think a lot of owners don't want to do this, and I'll talk real with you guys, is because they have some limiting beliefs, right? It's hard. It's hard to do. I gave you the laundry list a second ago, the SOPs, the technology. And if you're 58 years old, or 67 years old, or even 45 years old, and you're running a firm and you're putting out fires left and right, and you've got a personal life and this, that, and the other thing, it's hard to fathom how that's possible. It is possible. It is possible to do. There are people who want to work hard and they want to do it for the right reasons, but there's not a firm in their backyard that will give them the trajectory or has the culture that you have. So suspend disbelief, think about that. That remote piece is so important. I cannot emphasize that enough. Actually, at White Tiger, we are dedicating a major portion of our 2026 investment back into our own company around thought leadership. We'll be doing more webinars about this topic, specifically about how to create an environment where you are empowering remote staff to be successful and where you can very quickly identify if they are not being successful. And that's just so, again, important. I actually believe that it is essential to the survival of the profession when we are talking about anyone under the top 100 firms in this age of extreme consolidation and tremendous PE, blah blah blah. What the 2030s look like. Of course, there are still going to be $1 to $7 million firms, but I think that the $1 to $7 million firms that are not remote are going to have a really 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 hard time. And the main reason is talent scale is just not going to be possible because the talent that's going to be able to be client facing, right? In order for you to achieve this growth, for you to swallow M&A, for you to do organic growth, it's just not there. And that's true whether you're in Manhattan or Montana, because If you're in Montana, there's less talent because there's less firms. If you're in Manhattan, there's a lot of talent, but there's a lot of firms that are competing over that talent. So it's really kind of equalized regardless of where you're located. Some areas are worse than others, but nowhere is really good. And then finally, this last piece, which is important, run your business, run your firm like a business and not like a book. And that really has to do with making the hard decisions to extract yourself from being a bottleneck. And a lot of that comes down to talent and technology, but it has to do with all this stuff. How much recurring revenue do you have? The more of kind of the wheel that your clients are on, as opposed to these, administrative heavy bottlenecking project type engagements that stop and start and communication gets wonky, cadence stuff, even just communication is so powerful. The tech piece you can't emphasize enough. The remote piece is what makes a lot of that possible. And talent, of course. So if you're thinking like your business is a business and not like it's a collection of clients, probably what's going to end up happening is that you start realizing how many areas of your business you have to invest that 300, 500 million to take home pay that you have every year. And it stinks because you gotta eat the frog. But if you're making calculated investments with what would be your take home pay, and that gives you the ability to level up, is it worth it? I certainly think so. When you do the pro formas and you start to look at what's possible with something like adding $10 million in valuation to your practice, which is possible in 5 years, as we've said. So finally, we're going to get into the nitty gritty. How is this really possible? So let's take this firm in Pennsylvania, this second case study I gave above, which did 2 million in top line, 650,000 in all-in bottom line, and the firm sold for $2.7 million. How could it have sold for more than 12 million in 5 years? Well, how could it end up looking like this third firm, the $5 million top line, $2 million bottom line firm? Because essentially that's what it takes. That's what it takes to add 10 million is you got to put 3 more million on the top line, and you got to go from 650,000 to 2 million. You got to add a million 3.5 on the bottom line. Not impossible to do. A lot of the firm owners, a lot of you listening to this call today, you guys probably haven't done marketing in a long, long time. You guys probably have not done active business development and active networking and gone after your ideal client profile. You've probably done it in a passive capacity, but have you really been free enough? No, of course not, to go out there and to seek out, to actively strategize about how to get more clients, and then to you yourself go do it. That's a lot different than, paying a marketing agency $800 a month, or, even $3,000 a month to do demand generation for you guys. I mean, I'm talking about kind of an overhaul on the go-to market side for your business. And that's possible. It's possible to do, but you have to have the capacity to serve the clients. And that's the owner's paradox, is that, okay, if I magically squeeze water from the stone, and instead of working 55 hours a week like I'm doing right now during the off season, I work too much, so forget about tax, but, whatever it is, how do you squeeze that water from us? Sure, I can make the business come somehow, but then I got to serve it. And so you get caught, and I see it all the time, this feedback loop of inactivity. And so what has to happen? Well, this owner who did 650,000 in take home pay, here's what I would do if I was in his shoes. If I was running this business and I had 5 years of fire left in the belly, God willing, he was in his early 60s, God willing, 5 years remaining. I'm sure that he saved some money. So most accountants are pretty frugal guys, but if you want to do this, you got to invest in your practice. So what I would do if I were him, I wouldn't do this, snap of the fingers, but I would hire two. So he was, remember, mostly tax. He also did accounting advisory and certified comp and review. But tax is if you do tax, and if more than 50% of your revenue is tax, this is the hardest area of the market from a talent perspective. If I were in his shoes, I would be hiring 2 directors of tax in fully remote roles, each with a total compensation. So I'm talking base, bonuses, and employee benefit plans, kind of the total cost of a $250,000 on target earnings all in. And that's 500 grand off the back of my, so all of a sudden, I have no distributions and I'm taking a salary cut, but what does that enable me to do from a delivery capacity? Mind blown, right? I mean, if you have two people at that level who can deliver for clients, who can be client facing, who can do complex technical work, who can autonomously run initiatives, and that's what's possible at that level of compensation, right? This guy who sold the third practice, the $5 million top line, $2 million bottom line for $11.5 million, he had two or three people like this, which is of course the only reason why he was able to do 5 million in top line. All those clients aren't being serviced by him. He's got relationships with all of them, but many came into his practice and then never spoke with him again. Went to one of his highly competent people who did what the client needed them to do. And so all of a sudden, the way that you think about business development, that you can think about business development when you have that kind of capacity to serve clients is a completely different level. Because now you're not, I don't know, again, a lot of you guys probably haven't done marketing in a long, long time, probably haven't gone to networking groups and done stuff like that in a long time. But with this kind of delivery capacity, we're talking joint ventures with law firms. We're talking joint ventures with wealth management firms. We're talking joint ventures with payroll companies, with technology companies, with insurance companies. And the list goes on because public accounting services, like it or lump it, are the most in-demand professional service in the entire market. And the reason for that is this talent crisis that we can't stop talking about as a profession because it's holding us back. It's what's keeping us up at night. The retirement boom that's happening. There's not enough people to do this work. But if you're thinking only in additive client growth, because there's always the issue of capacity, you are never going to blow through that ceiling where you go from a $2 million firm to a $5 million firm. And that is where the 8 figures of latent enterprise value lives in your business, which is achievable in as little as a 5-year period. It's absolutely achievable. I have CPAs in my network who have built $5+ million firms in under 5 years from scratch. So it can be done. It can absolutely be done if you are already owning and operating a firm. So again, I spoke a lot more than I was intending to, but it was I was on a roll, and hopefully it was valuable to you guys. I would love to do some Q&A with these 10 minutes or so that we have left. So if you have some questions, anything that you found interesting today, drop it in the chat, and I would love to chat it out with you guys. And Mark, our CMO, put the link to the playbook for this webinar, which has some details on what we discussed today, and also the link for the August webinar. And I hope you guys all sign up for that. If you're not available at the date, we always do the recordings after these as well that you can access. So please do sign up and invite your friends. Can you hear this like something else you could drop in the chat? I don't know if you can hear this, like club music that's being played outside my office window at 8 o'clock at night. So funny. Okay, with AI, how do you see the automation playing a role? Well, there's some pretty cool products on the market today. I'll give you a few examples. So, one of the things so I'll talk about a couple tax products. Forgive me if you're not in tax, but I've been super impressed with some of the advancements that I've seen. So there are a lot of companies now. One company which comes to mind because I spoke with a client today who's using this solution is called Stanford Tax. Stanford Tax is one of Carbon's partners, Carbon, the project management software. I'm a big fan of theirs, and Canopy and TaxDome. They're all great. But anyway, the Stanford Tax company, Stanford Tax will look into last year's return, regardless of the software that you use, CCH Access, Lacert, Ultra, Intuit Pro. It'll look into the tax return from last year, and it will customize an organizer, and it'll send that organizer to the client. Then it will prompt the client via email and text message based on the protocol that you set to follow up with that client at intervals to collect the documents and get everything assembled. As we know, the administrative process is so much of what bottlenecks us during tax season. And then it will prepare all of those documents into a customized binder or a prepared work paper, which just takes off so much of the administrative function, and it's ready to be prepared. Well, then there is another suite of products. Juno is one that comes to mind immediately. Juno will take prepared work papers from a Stanford or a Stanford competitor, or from an admin if you didn't want to use a Stanford. I don't know why you wouldn't want to. And then Juno will pre-populate your tax software, CCH into it, whatever it is, with it'll do the preparer's job. It'll actually populate those prepared work papers regardless, and it does this with 95 to 99% accuracy. So arguably better than human error. And it will populate the return. The only thing it's not 100% with, it's a little shaky still with K1s and brokerage statements. But it's getting better all the time. And then it goes even a step further where it like has this agentic AI component, they call it, where it's like I think of it like a pixie. You get a pop-up inside your tax software with tax GPT that is suggesting strategies for the pre-populated return. So it's even going beyond what the preparer does into like what a reviewer one would do. And then you, as the reviewer two and signer, I mean, you're essentially eliminating the entire supply chain of delivery. There is wild stuff that is coming out. I think that this coming tax season is the first season that we are really, truly orders of magnitude going to see the effect of AI. I mean, we've seen a lot of cool stuff. What it's even done with Excel now for a couple of years has been amazing. And there's stuff with QuickBooks and with Xero, and there's custom widgets, and you can do crazy things threading together if this then that variables with Zapier and N8N, and there, I mean, there's so much cool stuff out there. But it's great. So again, just to follow up on the comment I made earlier, I don't see this as a threat to firm owners. I see this as a threat to preparers, to administrators, to people that are not in control of the tools. But the truth is that if you have a preparer or an administrator or a bookkeeper who you like, who is good with clients, who can learn new things, it's those character-oriented skills that are far more important than someone's, kind of black and white affiliation with a certain process or a certain piece of technology. So, talent, the purpose of talent is even evolving. It's so important to be open to change. That's probably the best thing I can say about that. Okay, what would you say are strong net profit margins for accounting firm trying to sell? I mean, it depends on what you want to do. If it, you see a couple of different examples. One really key kind of transitory point in your journey as you're growing your firm will be at the time that you go from being valued on a multiple of your gross revenue to when you're valued on a multiple of your adjusted EBITDA. But now there are apples and apples comparisons, because at the end of the day, a number is a number. So if you're a 5 million top line, $2 million bottom line firm that's selling for $11.5 million, you could say, okay, adjusted EBITDA to 1.7, you got the whatever 8 multiple or 7 and change multiple, whatever the math ends up being. And or you could say I sold for 2.2 times gross revenue, and in either case you would be telling the truth. But usually when the valuation is done on the basis of gross revenue, it's because you're somewhere between like 0.6 times gross is like fire sale level to like 1.5 times gross revenue is typically the highest gross revenue multiple that you'll see. SBA finance type stuff, SBA usually doesn't go any higher than 1.5 times gross. That's where you're getting the 90% of cash down. Once you're, running a proper business and not just a book, right? Which is, it's kind of a gray line for where this change happens from multiple of top to multiple of bottom. Somewhere around 1 million to 2.5 million in top line, somewhere between 400,000 and 1 million in all in, owner compensation. A lot of it comes down to, are you running, is even if you're the only partner, or even if you're the only partner, you could still sell for a multiple of of EBITDA, which is where you know start to see that arbitrage compared to like, you know, you're going to get more than 1.5 times gross revenue, but you won't sell for adjusted EBITDA multiples if you're the only client facing person at your firm. You need to have that infrastructure, that bench, so that the buyer can invest beyond you. So, you know, as sexy as it is to think about, you know, a number and a multiple when you're still growing things, I'd actually encourage you to think about, and I know as accountants, it's, you know, you guys and gals live in the numbers, so it of course makes sense. I'd still encourage you to think about your, you know, think about your growth and your exit plan in the terms of um how much longer do you want to do this? How much longer can you do this? How much risk are you willing to take? How much infrastructure can you build? Because a lot of the accountants that I talk to are more inclined to be, you know, managing partners or, you know, client service professionals, accountants, as opposed to CEOs. And if you really want to maximize your valuation, you need to start thinking like a CEO. And that's a really hard thing to do, to divorce yourself from your work, your life's blood, and to step back and to think about your business as a business owner. And they're very different hats to put on. So hopefully that's helpful to you. And guys, we're right at the top of the hour. So if you stuck with me to the end, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun for me. And please send me a message, a follow up with anything that you liked, you didn't like, ideas for topics. We're super accessible as a firm here at White Tiger. And I want to wish you all a great Wednesday night and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.